So we'll get started here. The request is to permit the sale and on-site consumption of alcohol as we define it in the LDO. It's a bar, tavern, nightclub. It is a business where alcoholic beverages are sold for on-site consumption, not part of a restaurant. So want to clear that up too. A restaurant, which we have both restaurants and bars in the downtown. Restaurant's going to have a certain percentage of food. They may or may not have alcohol, but they're not required to have a special use permit. The special use permit is required for the business that does not have the food. That is solely alcohol. The zoning on this particular piece of property is downtown mixed use, DMX. It also contains the local historic overlay, so it is within one of our local districts. Now, the production of evidence, and I touched on this just a minute ago. The burden is entirely on the applicant to produce evidence to show that he or she meets all of the standards that I'm going to show you on the screen. And so we talked about this at the planning board. We also talked about this at a staff level before this process even went public. But again, the burden, and so this is something that's important for you all to remember as you're hearing evidence, is that the burden is entirely on the applicant. Now, the burden is also on anybody else who chooses to come up and oppose this request. The burden is on them to produce evidence to show that the applicant is not going to meet the request. So this is, again, a guide for anybody in opposition. Folks who are in opposition who want to come up and say, I just don't like it, or I just don't like the applicant, or I don't drink, or anything like that, unfortunately, that's not good enough. They need to have competent material evidence as to why that individual's not going to be able to meet those standards. Does that make sense? So if all of the standards are able to be met, and I'm going to show you the standards, then there is an obligation that the permit must be issued. Conditions can be placed on the permit, and you have done this before. But again, if all of the standards can be met, then it must be issued. If even just one of the standards cannot be met, then you have an obligation to deny it. So as you go forward, if you receive conflicting evidence, then you decide what the facts are and decide accordingly. So what are those standards for decision? You have 3 general standards and then 1 specific standard. The 3 general standards are, number 1, does it meet all of the code requirements and comp plan requirements? 2, is the plan that was submitted visually and functionally compatible? Those are the 2 key words there, visually and functionally compatible to the surrounding area. And then will the public health, safety, and welfare be assured, and proposed development not substantially injure the value of adjoining property? So those are your 3 general standards. There is an additional standard that no such facility shall be located within 500 feet of any lot containing a school, and that would be a school as defined by the LDO. I can state that since Mr. Phillips is not here, he had to be in Raleigh today, and I am testifying on his behalf that there is no school located within 500 feet of this facility. So I will testify to that fact. So basically, in summary, does it meet the Code and Vision 2020 plan? Is it visually or functionally compatible? Is the public health, safety, and welfare going to be assured? And is it near a school? We've confirmed number 4. So the SUP application that was submitted is found here on the screen. It was also provided to you in your backup material. You'll note here on the right-hand side of the screen, on the back of the application, we do require the applicants to complete those 3 questions you just saw on the screen to be prepared for this meeting. So hopefully the applicant will be bringing that information as well as other information to again show that he's meeting those standards. The burden is on him to show that he's meeting those standards. So what is the development site? You'll see it's located here along South Lee Street. It is just south of Ennis Street. It's actually right here behind City Hall, just down the street. The zoning, as I noted, is DMX with an overlay of LHO. And then there is a similar use, another bar, tavern, nightclub that fronts onto East Ennis Street. Now, provide a little background as to what brought us here today. The applicant came to the Development Services Office last year and indicated that they well, I'm going to back up because I don't want to get into too much hearsay. They indicated that they have purchased the firehouse building. Firehouse building had been purchased by the applicant, and wanted to move their bar from the former location on Lee Street into the firehouse as a temporary measure until development on the former location could get underway and then hopefully finished, or that a restaurant could be applied for and developed in the firehouse. So in an effort to be friendly to our downtown merchants and anyone else in the city of Salisbury, staff agreed to issue a temporary use permit, a TUP. And that temporary use permit authorized them the ability to open up the bar, bench warmers, in the firehouse building where it is today. Since then, the name changed from bench warmers to the Firehouse Brew Pit. Now, we're not aware of the background details that went into that. But the temporary use permit was issued. It was originally issued for 6 months, and then we extended it for another 6 months. When the one-year period was beginning to wrap up, and we knew that construction on either site was not either commencing or well, certainly wasn't nearing completion, but also wasn't moving in the direction that we understood where he hoped to be. We indicated to the applicant that it's time for you to get out from underneath this temporary use permit, and you really need to have a special use permit. This really needs to be issued by City Council. This is a bar where conditions can be applied to the permit. If there's any problems, it really needs to be up to City Council to be handling those issues. We really need to get out from underneath this temporary use permit. So he understood, and he moved forward with the application process, and so that's where we are today. Since then, he has also submitted documents to upfit the Firehouse Brew Pit building, the Firehouse building, with restaurant plans, kitchen plans, to develop that facility as a restaurant. So really, in my office, he has 2 applications running simultaneously. You're just hearing one of them. You're hearing the special use permit, but he's also got tracking simultaneously a request to try to upfit the kitchen so that he can operate a restaurant out of that location. Why not just continue then with the restaurant and put to bed this SUP request? Well, the problem that he would have there is that since staff at our level, we've indicated that this TUP needs to sunset, he is needing to move forward with the special use permit issued by you all so that his doors are not shuttered. And so that's where we are today. We have granted an extension on the temporary use permit to March 1st, and we have also added 2 conditions to that temporary use permit. The first condition on the temporary use permit is that the back door, the door that leads out to the shared courtyard area between the adjacent property owner and this property, must be closed after 10 p.m., except for ingress and egress by staff and typical things like that. But in terms of patrons going in and out of that door and using the side courtyard, we have closed that after 10 p.m. every day. The second condition is that if there is one more police incident report generated by an activity that has occurred at this location, then we will immediately revoke the TUP. So I want to be clear, though, about the incident. Someone calling the police and the police showing up and telling everybody to be quiet, that's not necessarily an incident report. And I've learned all this from PD going through this planning board stage. Someone calls, police comes by, says be quiet, police drives on, there's not a report. But if there is an incident that takes place where there is a report generated, then at that time we need to take action. So those are the 2 conditions that staff have placed on the TUP. And again, we've extended it to March 1st. So we have encouraged the applicant to move forward with this request, even though he's also trying to move forward with the restaurant request. So I realize there's a ton of information that you're receiving right now, but all of this is very important. So the ABC permit that was issued, this was issued by the ABC board or the ABC commission, subject to our TUP. As noted, David included in here the floor plan for the firehouse, and then as I also noted to you before, kitchen plans have been submitted to our office for upfit for the restaurant. Taking a look at the street view, this is the building right there. Courtyard that I made reference to is on the right. This is facing southwest. Okay, here is the firehouse right here. This is looking towards Fisher Street. Ennis Street is to the back of the screen. And then this is looking away from the firehouse. This is looking towards Ennis Street right here into the Wallace lot. Now, I don't want to get into that because that's going to be an item that the applicant's going to discuss. This is looking into the courtyard. Well, no, I can testify to that. The adjacent property owner, the Salty Caper, went to the Historic Preservation Commission and sought approval to erect a fence essentially down, well, not the middle of the courtyard, but you can see where there is a brick portion of the courtyard and then there's a grassed portion of the courtyard. Forgive me, and Catherine, was it Salty Caper or was it the, well, okay, then it was the association, forgive me, came forward and requested the fence be erected down the side, and now the applicant will testify as to exactly what this is right here attaching to his building, but I need to let him testify to that. But HPC did grant approval for the Firehouse Association to erect a fence down the side of the courtyard there. And so again, we're back to the standards. Does it meet all the required principles and specifications of the ordinance? What I can testify as staff, as an administrator of the LDO, from this point, since he is not proposing any exterior changes to the building or adding any parking or any landscaping at this point, the use would meet all the specifications of the ordinance as it relates to the downtown mixed use, DMX. DMX does not require any off-street parking. Landscaping requirements are minimal and only kick in certain circumstances. And the use, if approved with the SUP, is one permitted within the DMX. So staff can testify that it does meet all the required principles and specifications of the ordinance, and staff will also testify that it does meet the intent of the Vision 2020 plan, that being continued development and redevelopment and growth of our downtown. So that's it. And so if you have any other questions, I know you will, then I'm here for those.
Any questions?
Just a clarity question, person. You said that this is a carryover from the previous bench warmers?
Yes, he came forward stating he wanted to relocate bench warmers to the firehouse as a temporary measure, and that bench warmers was going to reopen in its former location right here on the other side of Fisher Street, or pardon me, right over here. We issued the temporary use permit. He opened the bar, but then in that exchange, the name changed from bench warmers to Firehouse Brew Pit. He would need to testify exactly as to why the name changed.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
When was the original temporary use permit?
Original was issued January 14th of 2015.
I know this is probably hearsay because the restaurant doesn't matter, isn't part of this decision, but do you have any idea what the timing is on the application or the permit to open a restaurant there?
Unfortunately, that lies in the exchange between the city and the designer. The mayor could speak to this a whole lot better than I. When somebody submits plans to our office, we will review the plans, make comments on the plans, and then those redlined plans, so to speak, go back to the designer. The designer is then responsible to make corrections and resubmit those plans to us. So I could check with Teresa in our office. I'm not sure where we are in that exchange between plan review and the design being corrected by his designer. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So we are in that back and forth right now. But since restaurants can be approved, especially in the downtown, administratively, it is typically an expedient review process.
And I have one more question, which is, this SUP business is highly restricted and a little more difficult than your standard thing that we do. If and when, I just should say, if the restaurant permit is granted, kind of in the ordinary course of business, what happens to the SUP? Does the SUP, does that go forever? Is that attached to the land? Is it just for that one permit? I mean, do you understand? I don't know if I'm being clear, but
No, you're being very clear.
Is this for the end of time, that location is allowed to be a bar and a tavern? Is it a temporary? Can it have time limits? Is it temporary? Does it change in character once they bring in a restaurant and have food and alcohol?
They cannot exist simultaneously. If the special use permit is issued for the bar, so again, we're talking about bar, tavern, nightclub, no food. If the special use permit is issued for the bar, then that runs indefinitely with the land. Does not run with the tenant, nor does it run with the owner. So it runs with the land. However, that does not mean that the SUP cannot be altered or revoked by you, by the sitting city council. So, and you have revoked special use permits in the past. So if the permit is issued by city council, and if there are conditions placed on the permit, and then the applicant chooses not to adhere to any conditions, or if there are repeated code violations on the property, then at that time, staff has the right to bring the applicant back to city council and unfortunately indicate that conditions are not being met and that there are repeated code violations or police violations, and that we ask city council to re-review the permit. So even though it runs with the land, it's not protected forever.
Mayor, may I ask one more question, please?
Could I ask this? We've had a request from one of our council to have a small break. Can we stop this for a second?
Yes, ma'am. You can stop. The evidentiary hearing remains open. It is strongly recommended that the 5 of you remain completely separate from the general public and not interact with general public at all.
I think we can remain here. Go ahead.
Could I ask my one other question? Or we can take a break?
It's up to
We-
the mayor.
5-minute recess, is that what you're saying?
5-minute recess for Mr. Harding. So,
The only other thing I would request, Mayor, is that since the hearing is still open, please do not discuss it between yourselves.
okay, we'll
Please
stay
just-
right here, except for Mr. Harding. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is unusual. Okay, if everyone can take your seats, we're going to reconvene with our public hearing, or our, well, we didn't open it. I mean, we didn't close it, so we're still
Right.
open, so.
Did I answer your question, Councilman?
Yes, you did. But
He had
I
another
one more,
one.
which is it, but you said that you can revoke an SUP. It can come back before city council and you can revoke it or terminate it or what have you. Is it legally permissible to have an SUP with a time limit on it at the point in time that you grant it?
No, sir. It is not permissible to sunset one. You either need to not issue it or issue it with conditions, and then expect that they abide by the conditions.
Okay, any other questions from council? So you're done with your presentation?
Yes, ma'am. The
Except
only
we
other thing I
now
wanted.
we need to receive testimony from,
I did have a question.
Okay.
And I think it may be related to what he asked, but I want to ask it the way I wrote it down to make sure I picked up the answer correctly. I understand with a temporary use permit, you had some conditions about calls from the police department. I understand that the special use permit can have similar conditions. My question is, when a restaurant use, if that other tract goes through, and you said they can't both be there, if I heard you right.
Right.
So if the restaurant tract goes through, that means the SUP is pulled off. Does council still have any recourse in the case of any code or nuisance violations to somehow have leverage against those things occurring on a too frequent basis? You understand my question?
I believe I do, that if the applicant chooses to move forward with the restaurant and then the SUP. Now, keep in mind that that if he is granted the SUP today, and then he continues to move forward with the request for the restaurant, if he receives approval for the restaurant, he needs to choose one or the two. And so if he chooses one or the other, if he chooses the restaurant, then the SUP will need to come back here, and it would be a simple process. It would need to be revoked by City Council. But then if the restaurant moves forward, you are correct. There is not the ability by City Council to apply conditions on the restaurant because that's a by right use. But any and all nuisance and noise violations and things like that are still applicable and would be enforced by the police department.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
okay. Any other questions? All right, now we will receive testimony from proponents and opponents. I guess we will start with the proponents.
That's fine. Yes, ma'am.
So if you'll come forward, anyone who is speaking for this. Please state your name and address.
My name is Chris Austell. I live at 321 Brown Street in Rockwell.
Okay,
Todd Littleton, 525 Pebble Point, Salisbury.
thank you.
And I guess I'll start out. Let's go with the way that we ended up here is to expand on that a little bit. Of course, bench warmers is under construction, has been for a little while. It's steadily moving forward now. We had the property, the firehouse property, that we could move to, obviously to keep income coming in as well as keep my employees employed. We got over there, loved the building. The reason it's called the Brew Pit is because we had plans of putting barbecue in there as well as beer. So we were heading in that direction, knowing that we were at the end result was going to be a restaurant. Now, here it is, February, and bench warmers is still not done. It's steadily moving forward, but that's why we're in the situation we're in now. I do want to put a restaurant in. That is our plans to put a restaurant in. It would have been done already, except for it takes quite a bit of capital to go ahead and put the kitchen in, and we are in the middle of a lot of capital on Fisher Street. So we're going to be moving towards fixing that. Matter of fact, we can avoid all this, and I'll pull that permit application if I can just get a 6-month extension on my temporary. And we can just stop right there, and it'll be a restaurant. We don't have to worry about it anymore. But if that's not an option, then I will go on to explain, I guess, part 3, what we've done for safety and welfare. Came to my attention during our first planning board meeting that there were concerns from our neighbors. I was not made aware of those until that planning board meeting, so therefore I did not know there was a problem. Anything that I did know about, I tried to address at the time because we had some things going on back in July. So we've addressed all those problems, which mainly came from our shared courtyard, not controlling the rear exit enough. Therefore, our patrons were able to come and go kind of as they pleased, and they may cross over into their property, into our shared parking lot. They had issues of seeing people urinate outside, as well as throw up. They also had expressed concerns because apparently someone was having sex on an outdoor staircase to a basement. So definitely concerns that we should be concerned about also. Since then, we have also gone a step further on the conditions put on us by Planning Board. We have closed the courtyard completely. It's used for emergency egress only. It is until it can be secured. They have, the Firehouse Lofts have erected a fence. It went up last week. We're putting the rest of the fence in, so it'll be totally enclosed. We are completely separated from them. The only way to reach their property is to be able to go through their gates or around the building. So we have, with their help, controlled access. But like I said, the courtyard is closed until all measures can be taken to control all access. And I think that was where any of our problems have come from. We've had, spoke about police calls. There have been a few police calls there to the firehouse, but very few, whenever I say a lot of phone calls, we've got 9 instances over the past 8 months. We've been open since May. And most of the instances have been us calling the police department for something going on not on our property. So we really haven't had any issues with the police department. Spoke with one of the liaisons from the police department, and they confirmed that we are not an issue. So we're moving forward with that. Let's see. Now, I think that's about it on the safety. We've controlled all of our exterior and tried to address all problems that have been brought to us.
And if I can add to that, under the special use permit, we are required by law to have members only within the bar. So if anyone walks within the door, we know their name, their address, their phone number, and every bit of information about them. We've been in business for a long time at Benchwarmers, and we know the crowds that come out to frequent our establishment. And we've painstakingly tried to remove some of the problems that we had at Benchwarmers to create a higher upscale establishment over at the Firehouse. So with the special use permit, we are aware of everyone that comes through the door. We've blocked a lot of the people that are problems, and we are within compliance of the ALE board. They've been in twice every week basically since this started just to check up on us. We've had a great relationship with them. We meet all of their standards. Same with the police department. I'm there 5 or 6 nights a week till 3:30 in the morning, and I know basically every police officer that walks on foot or drives by. I'm the one making these police calls for the most part. I'm the one that stopped a gunshot outside at the stop sign the other day. The assault in the parking lot across the street, I'm the one that's doing that. And I think our vigilance within the community is actually a good thing. I see things that people don't see, and it's not because it happens within our bar, it just happens in it's kind of insulting, honestly, to hear that we're an unsafe establishment. We've all been together for a long time. There are 16 kids that depend on the Firehouse for everything, and to hear that we run an unsafe establishment or that nature is just kind of insulting, honestly. We work hard to ensure that we have a safe atmosphere. And I can understand the fence part. There were people trekking back and forth, but the fence issue has gone up, and it definitely is cut down. We haven't let anyone out our back door in 3 weeks.
And to that point, also being in business at Benchwarmers, which was a private club, 20 years now, 20 years. That's a long time for a bar, nightclub, or anything to make it. We have never been threatened with being shut down. Any violations we've had have been a membership violation, or we've never had underage drinking. I mean, we've never been threatened with being shut down. And 20 years is a long time to be running a private club. So therefore, I know how to do it, and we do it, and whenever there is a problem, we address it immediately. And I know it'll come up that we used to use police presence over at Benchwarmers. We would do that at the Firehouse, but we don't feel a need. We do not feel any need whatsoever. We feel like that we have a very safe crowd. You know, we've got over 1,200 members, and I could have paraded them all in here to tell you how they always come in, they have a good time, and they never worry about their safety. My wife has been working in, you know, one of the 2 bars for 16, 17 years, and I would never allow her to be in danger. And, you know, so yeah, it was very hurtful for us to hear that people thought that we had an unsafe environment. So, but,
And we do cater to the corporate. We have, every Tuesday and Thursday, we have Food Lion Corporate comes in for their Thirsty Thursdays or whatever they call them. We have pro mats on Fridays. We have out-of-towners coming in because we're the only adult establishment within town where people can come out and enjoy themselves and talk business and talk shop. And every person that walks through the door loves the building. It's the historical building. It's a beautiful building, and Todd's done great work on upgrading that place. And there is not a single compliment or a single negative thing said by any person that frequents our establishment, except for people that don't frequent our establishment. And I hear the whispers too, the same city gossip that you hear. We hear it too. People want to come in and ask all the questions and things they see in the paper. And there are no fights in our bar. We don't allow that sort of thing. And I have these white hairs now because we don't have those fights in the bar. And we work hard for that. I don't want to come to work and get in a fight or have anyone else fight. And so we keep it as safe as we possibly can.
Todd, can I ask you to testify to one thing that I was unable to testify to? This image that was placed in here by David indicates the green line, which is the fence that has been erected by the firehouse. Can you indicate what this portion is right here?
yes, sir. Of course, the green line, blue line is the fence that just went up. You can see where the red is. That will be the fence that we'll be putting up to match it. In between brick pillars that were already there, and also a locked gate, a keyed gate that only staff will be able to use. And that's our, that makes it where the whole courtyard is enclosed and can be controlled.
Thank you.
Okay. Preston, may we ask questions of them?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Because
Thank you. I have a question. Mr. Littleton, I respect what you've said, and I appreciate your testimony. It occurs to me that perhaps if people are losing bodily fluids outside and committing intimacy acts in public, that's not a fence problem, that's an alcohol problem. And I would question if you're 100% compliant with ALE, I think you're supposed to cut people off before they are irresponsible with their alcohol. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely, I sure can. We can't control everybody. People do things, and those people that were doing whatever act they were doing were immediately barred. Controlling people is a funny thing. I don't have to have been
Tell
drinking.
us about it, sir.
Yeah, I don't have to have been drinking to know that, yeah, I've got to go to the bathroom. Maybe I go outside and go out and, hit the wall. I mean, it happens. If I really can't give you an excellent answer as to why people do what they do. And it's not necessarily alcohol induced. That happens outside of McDonald's. They don't serve alcohol. And we are trained, and we do not have we do in the letter of the ALE law, and obviously we do it fairly responsibly because we're still in business, and we have been, and we get checked quite frequently, especially since all this has started, and complaints. So yes, we have capable staff that does do that.
And if I may, earlier on, the sex in the courtyard thing, I was there, and I didn't see it with my own eyes. She came in and alerted me that it was going on. I walked out there and I removed those people immediately. It was maybe 5 o'clock, and it's just not something you expect to happen. And obviously it caught her off guard, it caught all of us off guard, and it's not something that just doesn't really happen. And the urinating outside, again, these problems can't be exclusive to us. We aren't the only people in town where some people make horrible decisions within the confines of our establishment. It happens across the board, across everyone that runs a food service business of some kind faces people that make horrible decisions, and those restaurants or establishments aren't held accountable by the actions of the one or two incidents that happen. And so it's happened. We can't deny it. But we are doing everything in our power to not let these people back in. Like you said, the people that were having sex are no longer welcome within our bar. People, if we see someone going to the bathroom outside or have seen someone going to the bathroom, we remove them immediately and we don't allow them back in. That's the beautiful thing about being a private club. We can revoke their membership. They are no longer welcome. But as far as people making horrible decisions, that happens across the board, regardless of where they are.
I believe, based on your testimony, I mean, my sense is right now that you've met the first 2.5. I haven't heard any testimony regarding whether or not this affects the value of adjoining property, and I don't know if you have any testimony to offer on that issue.
I think we can only hear value testimony from
Expert.
certified real estate professionals.
I know, but that's my question, is whether we have any evidence relative to value, because that is one of the standards that I mean, that's one of the evidentiary hurdles that has to be met.
You are correct, Councilman, that, well, and Mayor Pro Tem, that property value statements are required to be based on expert testimony, just as our I'm sorry? No. And I would note that, and forgive me, I did not mention this at the end of my presentation, but the final hearing at the Planning Board did recommend denial of this permit based on the fact that, or based on their inability to find to standard 3, or that standard 3 was met. So
Standards back up, please.
Relative to value, the health, safety, and welfare.
they did not specify exactly which portion of number 3. The motion that was made was that standard 3 was not able to be met due to inadequate evidence to show that number 3 has been met or can be met. And so, therefore, since one of the standards was not able to be met, they were obligated, again, as I mentioned, to recommend denial. That does not mean that the applicant can't overcome that hurdle today. It's just that it's the responsibility, the burden is on the applicant to overcome that and produce adequate evidence. Now, keep in mind that if you do not hear adequate evidence today, if you don't feel that competent material evidence has been submitted to meet all these standards, you can ask that that evidence go be obtained, and then you can keep the evidentiary hearing open, and you can hold decisions and then come back at another meeting. So you're not obligated under law to decide today.
How does that affect March 1st, the March 1st deadline? Because we won't have another council meeting, I don't think, do we?
We don't.
March 1st is our next meeting.
March 1st is our next meeting.
Okay, so that's the way my kids do their homework.
I can say that my tax value went up $45,000 since it's been there in the 8 months. I just got a note yesterday. So I can tell you that tax value has gone up $45,000 since we've been there.
I think it actually refers to the adjoining property to determine what
Right.
effect that it might have on them. Kenny, I think you.
I've got just a few questions, but first, just so we ensure for the records, and I hate to say Chris, but what was your last name, sir?
Ostle?
Austin?
Ostle, O-S-T-L-E.
Okay, I'm sorry. And what I just want to preface it with is just my pursuit of clarity is not a personal attack at all, but I just wrote down a series of questions for you. Now, you said you were formerly Bench Warmers, and now you are the new name. So you're taking the same clientele, essentially, from Bench Warmers to your new facility. Is that correct?
Actually, no, sir. It's the clientele has changed quite a bit.
Okay, now you say you have membership.
Yes, sir.
But you're a public entity as well.
No, we're a private club.
So no one can just come in. So then you are in control basically
Yes,
of who
sir.
comes in there. The thing that concerned me, you said you took offense to being called unsafe, but you said you made 9 calls in 8 months. How many is too much or not enough?
Well,
or-
those
We
9
didn't
calls.
make 9 calls in 8
No,
months.
there have
You
been.
said you made 9 calls. You made most of those calls in 8
We
months.
made 2.
He was reporting things that were going on across the street. A lady was being chased. He reported a guy going down the street shooting a gun. I mean, these are, what I was saying is, out of the 9 calls that are listed with 113 South Lee Street, there've only been, there's 3 noise complaints. The rest of them have been like lockouts, us calling the police because somebody ran out on a tab. I mean, they're not.
So the other things you described, the sexual escapades and things like that, that did not happen in your club?
It happened outside.
In the
Yes,
courtyard.
sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So my concern and what I'm framing in my head is it just, I don't want it to be akin to, we change from bench warmers to the fire brew pit, and it's like we're just, putting on new clothes and we're not taking a shower. We're just carrying the same thing over, to a new location. And it sounds like we do have some issues, whether it was bench warmers or whether it was, in your new location. And I don't want us to minimize, what the issues and what the concerns were and then blame everything on alcohol. The other clarity issue that I was asking about, you said you talked to someone in the Salisbury Police Department who said you were not an issue. Who was that? Who was that specific person?
Miss Melanie Thompson. That it did not. That I asked if we ever came up in conversation in meetings, if we were an issue, and she said not to her knowledge, and I would assume that she would know.
And then you said that you have met specific standards with the ALE and the SPD. That was a little general. What specific standards did you meet? Because what it sounds like is, I don't want to minimize what you've done if you've progressed, but we've got issues, but then we're saying we don't have issues. So what specific standards did you meet and have exceeded?
Well, by law, the special use permit says that we have to be a members-only bar, which ALE has to come in and check and make sure that every person in the bar is a member. When they come in, they can randomly pick anybody out of the crowd and say, show us your membership card. So every time they come in, we're always compliant with that. All of our liquor has to be stamped legally, showing that we purchased it through the ABC store. That always does. They go through business, everything. They can come walk through the bar. They can go through every aspect of our business to see that we're compliant with them, and we always have.
So you've met operational efficiencies, but not necessarily addressing the safety. I don't have a comfort level. It seems like you've met the operational issues.
Well, as far as I know, ALE doesn't really monitor safety. I mean, they do. They expect us to cut people off when they drink too much, which we do, but other than that, they don't put place limitations.
No, and don't confuse what I'm asking you. I understand the role of ALE. What I'm saying, it just sounds like you're minimizing the issues that have occurred previously, the issues that have occurred recently, and then you're mixing it with operationally, we're doing fine. So I don't want to marry or mix the two to say, yeah, we're doing everything great operationally, but you don't give anybody any comfort in saying that we have a handle or control. And, to just say it's, well, we can't control, behavior, we can't control, you can control it if you have private membership and you say that
we
you
do.
can
We do control it. Now, can we control what people do when they leave? No, sir, we cannot. We do control it. Inside of our walls, we've got stuff under control, and even outside. And the reason I brought these up is because these are the things coming from the neighbors that were brought to my attention over a 9-month period of running a bar, 365 days a year. And so we tried to address them now, and these are the only things that have ever been brought to our attention. We have had no problems with the law. We've had no problems with any other entities as far as that goes. So yeah, we do have control. There are some things that happen in any establishment that are out of your control.
So last, and this is my final question, and I'll yield my floor to Mr. Miller. But so when you were at Benchwarmers, and you may not have a specific number, do you have a number of police calls or police involvement or things that happened while you were at Benchwarmers, a number versus the last 8 months? Where you are? Considerably more, considerably less? About
I would say,
same?
well, I mean, you've got 300 people you're controlling. So as far as inside, I would say I don't have no, sir. I don't have a number.
Okay.
You know, I know that I would have to say that my comfort level would be, if I had to put one on it, would be much higher at the firehouse. I mean, because you're not dealing with 300 people, you know, and it's not a nightclub.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Miller?
I had one more question
And
also.
then Matt. Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Preston, I guess this is for you. Has the fire department signed off that with these gates being locked, that there's adequate egress in case of an emergency?
I'm not aware of that. I believe the fence, well, I can't testify to that. Is Catherine still here? No, okay. I'm not aware, but I can certainly find out for you,
Okay,
Mayor Pro
thank you.
Tem.
Mr. Miller?
I would like to hear from the folks in opposition before I ask my questions.
Okay. I think have we heard everything we needed to from the proponents? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we'll open the floor for the opponents. So if you'll come forward, state your name and address.
I'm Judy Kendall, and my address is 303 West Marsh Street, and I actually own one of the commercial spaces in the Firehouse Urban Lofts, and we are a C corporation, and by law we are required to have a board and elected officers, and as part of that I am the secretary. So as the secretary, and for continuity, because I was at both parts of the planning board hearing, I will be spokesperson for our whole group and organizing so we can have an efficient presentation. One of the things that we have noticed is that Benchwarmers has made these transitions, and they have physically moved from their former location, which backed up to an alley with a very tall building behind it with no windows. And they are now on South Lee Street, where essentially that back alley space has rotated to be on a courtyard that faces on South Lee Street and is very public. And it is by extension part of the property that they function in as a bar tavern or a private club. And they have a picnic benches on the side, so it's been an area that's been gotten great use and has created some problems between the two buildings and residents. And what we have found is that as FOMA, the condo association, we are actually pretty typical for a mixed-use building. We're starting to see them develop downtown, but this one has been there for a long time, for 9 years and about 10 months. And in the time that we've been there, we have 6 commercial properties on the first floor. We have 10 residential properties on the second floor, and they're also live-work. So we're in the model of what new urban development looks like. Our population makeup is what's successful cities look for. Demographically, we have people who are before having children and working, and we have people who are after raising families, and we go ahead and compete for the same residential spaces, have discretionary income, and support downtown. So we're delighted to be there, and we're delighted that there are new neighbors coming in the Wallace Annex, and that the city went ahead and appropriated some funds for their development. What has happened is we have actually been urban pioneers. That building was there when the pool hall was not the Norval Theater, when Emma's and the smoke shop were 2 derelict buildings. And so the folks who have been in this complex are not squeamish about the vitality and noise and activity of downtown. But there is a challenge when it passes beyond a certain point. And unfortunately, that is what we have been experiencing, and we hope to provide evidence that will help in your decision that you need to make tonight. One of the things that we have to present, and how we'll do this is someone will give out the evidence we have. We didn't want to just dump it on you, because what we found at the last planning board hearing is there was some duplication of reports, and so we didn't want to flood you with paper that you might not need. These are the police reports from the Firehouse Brew Pit since it's been in its new location. And Mr. Littleton has gone ahead and explained how most of them are minor things. What we'd like you to take a look at is there are disturbances and physical and noise calls, and the time frame on these are written in the 2400-hour clock, so that 2400 is midnight, 12 o'clock is noon, 1 o'clock is an AM. I have a crib sheet here because it's not my usual way of telling time. So most of these reports, you will see that they are happening long after the noise ordinance has gone into effect. And we are a residential community right next to all of that. And at different times, we've gotten long and short reports from the police department. But one of them for an escort was because the bartender wanted to have an escort to his car after work. And so that was a little bit paused, that the bartender did not feel safe going to his car. So that's a safety issue. The second list that we have is we did ask for the bench warmers police report from when the permit went into effect, the process went into effect for Firehouse Brew Pit, because that some of it happened January 1st, but they didn't move in until April. So I think if you go to page 3 on what's being handed out now, down around the bottom, that will be the relevant overlap time. And so there are the same kinds of time reports, disturbances, verbal, and again, they're occurring at 2200, 2200, 236, 224. They're very late compared to the noise ordinance. So that, they sort of moved that pattern from where they were in bench warmers to where they are now. But now we are neighbors next to them, and we're not a back alley. So that has made a difference in what we're aware of. The third thing we have is a police report that was picked up this morning, and this is an event report. The date on this is 2/11/16. And it was called in by bench warmers, and it is a basically at the bottom of page 3 there's a short statement that tells you what the call was about. The caller statement was a black female, Nancy subject. They're putting her hands on several people, and she has the bar manager pinned to the bar now. And that event happened over a period of from 23:38:26 to 1:38:22. So it was about an hour and a half that was in progress. So we really don't quite agree with Mr. Littleton that there have been no police reports or involvement. The last thing that we have relative to police We were asked a lot of questions at planning board, so some of the things that we had to produce, were ready to produce at the Part B of the planning board hearing, because it was spread out over two, was in response to that, because it was a question of what kind of surveillance or police participation. And number 3 on their application says that they have a strong relationship with the police department and off-duty folks as required. And we asked the police for their off-duty log, extra-duty police log from bench warmers, and they said there wasn't any, and that we needed to have firm evidence. So we went ahead and asked the police department for that. And so what you will get is a letter from Captain Melanie Thompson. Dear Mr. Wilson, and this is Jeff Wilson, he went ahead and requested it. As per our conversation today, I am confirming with you that the Firehouse Bar has not hired any of our officers since they have been open to the public. Mr. Littleton commonly hired officers for his establishment, bench warmers, when it was located on Fisher Street. Mr. Littleton said that he has not needed the services of off-duty officers at his new place, and that in the future, if he needed us, he would call. Mr. Littleton uses his own in-house security staff at the present time, and it's signed by Captain Thompson. What we attach to that as well is the policy statement of the extra duty employment, so that it would be clear that what she had said was indeed verified in more ways. At the on page 2, around the middle, extra duty police employment will not be on the premises or connected to a business that sells alcoholic beverages for consumption on premises unless specifically authorized by the chief of police. So there is an extra surety that there will be a record of someone doing off-duty work here, as opposed to something like the Maroney Theater we always see. The minimum rate of pay is established, and then also any other rate has to be approved, and that solves the problem of somebody all of a sudden getting paid $1,000 an hour to be an off-duty policeman. So we attach this, and then also the form is on the back that they would have to, a police officer would have to fill to do the work. Violations that have happened in its dual role as being a private club distinction for the ALE and a bar tavern for the city of Salisbury. The ALE membership requirements are they have to identify themselves as something that is different from the public. And so this first thing is something that I got as a member of the Public Art Committee from Downtown Salisbury, Inc. And it was celebrating Happy New Year and telling the events of what's happening. And if you look on page 2, or actually page 3 in the middle, you will look at how places are presenting themselves and what the activities are for New Year's. Cafe Brazil, which is a restaurant bar, free admission. Emma's of Salisbury is listed with its reservations. Firehouse Brew Pit, free admission. Go Burrito, free admission. That's a restaurant. Firehouse Brew Pit needs to say free membership. They are not the same as Cafe Brazil, Go Burrito, or anywhere else. They are a private club and a membership. The next thing we have is the Brew Pit fire suspension that happened in September of this year. They were in violation of their not checking members. They were closed down for 3 days and they paid a fine. And so those documents are attached here. And there's the narrative of the suspension as well. You ready? Okay. The other things that we have found that are inconsistent with the ordinances as we understand them, in the 10 months that they have been here in operation, we do not see any outside trash or recycling receptacles. And as a private club that is using only recyclables, they do not have what is required for recyclables, and they do not have a container for their trash. And both of those are required by the city ordinances. And what's also attached here is a recycling certificate, part of their application to be what they are, recycling compliance form. And there's a company listed here, but there are no supplies of any kind for things to happen. The enclosure in the back of in the parking lot that we share is totally the responsibility and the ownership of the Firehouse Urban Lofts, and has been there as long as it has been in existence. So that is where some of our recycling is. It's where our dumpster is. It is where Salty Capers required recycling bin is. But there is nothing in there that is Mr. Littleton's or the brew pit. So we do not understand where their garbage is going, but they do not have their own provisions. And the city ordinance 21-24 does require that businesses have trash disposal units. So those are the documents we have. What we would like to do now, when you're ready, is to go ahead and have the personal eyewitness reports that we have, because we know that hearsay is not acceptable, and so I cannot give you a summary. We have ourselves organized in an order, and hopefully that will help our efficiency. I will come back and read an affidavit for one of our members who could not be here, and then we'll have some closing comments.
Thank you, Judy.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Wilson, 518 Malvern Avenue, also in commercial property in downtown, 128 East Ennis Street. I'm the property manager for the Firehouse Urban Lofts, real estate broker, broker in charge eligible in the state of North Carolina, and I served on the Housing Advocacy Commission group for a number of years here. As the property manager, one of my duties is to, of course, interact and talk to the residents and the commercial property owners in the building. In the short amount of time that the brew pit's been open, I've heard from 8 out of 10 of those residential units, either from the people that live there or the owners, from tenants. I was going back reviewing. We had a vomit incident about a month ago in the parking lot. I was going back reviewing this tape. I did confirm that the person did walk over from the brew pit to the adjacent property. The fence would have prevented, the fence that's now erected would have prevented that travel path, but they could have gone another way into the Firehouse Urban Lofts parking lot and done the same thing. So while it's going to possibly help with safety, it's not going to solve all the problem of trespassing on adjacent property. On that same tape, as I was watching and saw that, less than 30 minutes later, 2 other people walk over to the Firehouse Urban Lofts, sit down in the courtyard area that's right there for the use of that property, and they pulled some things out of their pockets, started doing whatever they were doing, looked up, noticed the camera, got up and moved to a different location on the same property in the stairwell to discuss, conduct business, whatever they were doing. Stood there for less than 30 seconds and then went back into the brew pit. These are obviously just safety concerns and things that are really unacceptable for anybody that wants to feel safe and live in this building. We mentioned 10 residential units in the building. We have 1 short-term residential, kind of a nightly, weekly Alta. That's 26 bedrooms in the building directly next door. some of these bedrooms are less than 15 feet away from this courtyard area. And then when I'm sitting here watching this video on tape, someone's grandkids are showing up, going upstairs to visit their grandparents. And it just doesn't seem like a good fit to me. That being said, we've got more residential planned for downtown. We've got more dense use. And so, variances are something that really need to be given some serious consideration, and especially in such a dense district as the downtown. Lots of different uses there. Two of the things that I've heard mentioned tonight, the ALE issue. There was an issue with the brew pit in this location where there was a violation of the membership, where the ALE officer came to the location and evidently everyone in the location did not have a membership. Also, they made mention of someone walking out on a bar tab. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's probably in the police report. I believe it was over a $100 bar tab. So how do you go into a private club, run up over a $100 bar tab and skip out on it? Then the owners of the club call the police to try to find the person. How do you not know their name, address, and just give them a call and say, hey, you forgot to pay your bill? That's about all the comments I have to say on that, I guess. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And who would be next? Thank you. And if you'll state your name and address, thank you.
My name's Kimberly Crowley. I live at 125 South Lee Street, right here in Salisbury. And I would just ask if you could put the courtyard view.
From the ground or from aerial?
From the ground, please. One, keep going. Yep. One more. That one.
Oh, that.
Okay. So I actually, as young as I am the longest living resident in this building. It's been there for 9 years, and I've been there for 8. And I actually live right above the Salty Caper. So that's my house. And as you can tell, as Jeff mentioned, I am very close to the designated courtyard area. And so I'm here really basically to tell you that in the months and the time that the Firehouse Brew Pit has opened, I have seen and heard and been involved in a lot of things that I have never been involved in essentially 7 years prior, I guess, if you will, probably 7.5, because starting this summer really is when it became an issue. And right now, unfortunately, due to the weather, I firmly believe that we're not incurring a lot of the noise issues because the outside area has finally been blocked off, but people don't typically stand outside. But they are standing right out front of the building, and as you well know, noise travels. And depending on the decibel level of that noise, it's difficult to determine whether or not someone sitting directly underneath the Salty Caper, that awning that you see, is or is not making more noise than someone standing out front of the Firehouse Brew Pit or in their back courtyard area. Being that safety is the number one topic, I find it ironic that the very first thing that was done that summer was not to erect a fence, was not to find a way to make sure that there was no crossover from the two properties. But the most important thing to me was that they put patio tables out there, umbrellas, and everything else to encourage their patrons to go outside. On a lovely day, why not? This brings me to my first incident that occurred sometime in June. I was outside. I have some big dogs, and I was outside directly behind this building. There's some grass area for our homeowners, and there was a patron sitting on one of the picnic tables with an off-leash dog. So the dog was not on a leash, and from what I had seen early on in those months, the dogs were actually allowed to go in and out of the bar. So this dog at that time was a very small, what I believe was a Chihuahua, and like dogs do, came running over to my dogs. Well, mine are on leash, and I'm pulling them back, and this particular patron decided to tell me that I should bring my dogs down one at a time. And I said to him, you should keep yours on a leash. And the next comment he made was, does anybody hear an idiot talking? I've never been called an idiot by a single person that has visited the Salty Caper. Hundreds of customers and families, and I've never had interaction with anyone like that. And this is even to the point where when I take my dogs out, I'm walking right past people with my animals, like very closely. And they've not had issues with me, and I've not had issues with them. I made a phone call, and I asked to speak to Todd. That was one of the only times that I've ever spoken to Todd on the phone. I told him that the issue is not with the dog, the issue is with the human. He apologized and said he would take care of it, but there was no further conversation beyond that. Two incidences that happened pretty closely behind that. My fiance is Cuban, so he has brown skin, and we were walking out to the back parking lot, and this was 11 o'clock in the morning. Another dog off leash decided to kind of follow us as we walked by. No eye contact was made, no conversation, and what we hear from behind us is, you're not chasing that effing Mexican. We stop in our tracks and turn around immediately and said, excuse me, what did you say? I walked into the bar, and at this point, yes, I actually did speak to the gentleman that spoke on behalf of Firehouse Brew Pit, and I said, this is what just happened, and his remark was, I can't control him. I left. No phone call was ever made to me. No one ever reached out to apologize on behalf, and it's one thing to be outside, but again, just consider the time of day being 11 a.m., and I was minding my own business. Late in July, one evening, I returned home from vacation. I'm unloading some things out of the vehicle. I get a phone call from my fiance, who pretty bluntly says there are two people having sex outside. To my disbelief, I go outside, and sure enough, if you see the staircase, just beyond that is actually where their little back entrance is, and then one more little notch over is the steps that go down into the basement of that building. And sure enough, there were two people having sex. So I walk into the bar, and that time, just to clarify, he was not the person that came outside on that occasion. It was actually a female bartender who I said, you know, this is what's going on. She came out. Her response was, you effing know better. And those customers were not asked to leave at that moment. So I do not know if they have not been asked to not return, but they were not asked to leave in that very moment. Beyond that, I have often pulled into the parking lot and seen people that I know are not residents using our back lot to access the Firehouse Brew Pit. As a small female, I'd like to think that I could fight off anybody, but regardless of fencing, that parking lot is not secure. And that is my concern for safety, is that there's been no effort made to deter patrons or ask patrons not to access that back parking lot, so that before I enter into my courtyard area that is now currently being fenced, I'm not safe when I get out of my car. And most of us may know that a lot of altercations happen when you're getting in and out of a vehicle in a back parking lot like that. The noise is indescribable at times. It can be as high pitch, it can be a cackle, it can be two people yelling. I have overheard multiple verbal fights that carry through those windows that you see right there. That's my bedroom, actually, right off the balcony. And in fact, I was awakened by the shotgun that happened just weeks ago. So being that I've lived downtown for a number of years, I have actually become very accustomed to the trains and to the noises and to the low talking of people, and maybe the occasional disturbance. But since the Firehouse Brew Pit has been there, it's a disturbance on a nightly basis. I cannot sit in my living room without hearing noises and the carrying on of people at all hours of the day. To, again, let you know, from my personal standpoint, there's not been an effort to go outside and encourage patrons to come back inside until all of this became an issue. Early, there was no effort to control those people. And that's where I really find that, as a person who has lived there for now 8 years, to have this many issues and have to be sitting here today when I have lived above a bar and pizza restaurant for that many years prior, I think speaks loads and more than it probably needs to.
Anyone have questions?
This is the only, not for this young lady, but for Miss Kendall. I may have zoned or something. When you handed us this about the New Year's Eve, what was that point again?
But Judy, you're gonna need to.
Sorry about that. Thank you. If
you.
a business is operating and anyone can come in, then they can advertise in different ways than a private club can come in and advertise. And so a business would say that they can say free admission, there's no cover charge, but that does not apply to a membership private club only, which a bar, tavern, restaurant has to be by definition.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hello?
Mayor, members of council, my name is Rex Road. My current address is 127 South Lee. I am a member of the Firehouse Urban Lofts, and I've lived there since August of 2015. But a year prior to that, we visited Salisbury and decided that we really liked it. We were drawn to the vibrant downtown atmosphere, the restaurants, the shopping, the events that were going on. We found a suitable property at the Lofts, and we liked the little boutique caper that was right below us. It was perfect for retired people, and that's what we were looking for. I will say that if we would have visited later after the brew pit opened, we may not have been here. I'm not trying to be rude to Mr. Littleton in any manner, but I'm going to tell you what things were like after he moved in. What I saw, there's no reason for me to go into a whole lot of things because you've heard them all. I'll try just to hit on them as I go. If you have any questions or if I get too verbose, you yell at me, okay? Because I can sometimes get too far out in left field sometimes on things. But one thing I've noticed a whole lot that we there is early morning altercations. And we're talking like 1 o'clock, 1:32, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. We're talking noise, yes, but we're also talking arguments. We're talking verbal invectives, and anybody that knows anything about bars knows that alcohol-fueled arguments are only one step away from violence. And as loud as they are and as violent as the arguments are when they wake us up in the morning, it's only a matter of time before there is a violent happening. I saw the urination. I witnessed the urination. I witnessed inebriated people falling down on the property and either sleeping or passing out on the fire escape. I witnessed people staggering around in the yard and coming over and laying on the firehouse loft property at 2:30 in the morning. I didn't see any employees from the brew pit. I didn't see any security. The only thing I saw were the people that were drinking. I do not think that these conditions of any kind of like that represent what the planners of downtown Salisbury had in mind for downtown. We talk about the evaluation of property, and I can't make a realtor appraisal of property. I worked for 24 years as an appraiser for an insurance company. I had to learn how to appraise things, so I'm not going to tell you that I can tell you how much my property has decreased or increased or whatever because of where I live. But one thing I'd like for everybody to think about is the desirability of your property. When you set a piece of property down and you set a restaurant beside of it, and then you set a piece of property down and you set a full 16-hour-a-day bar beside of it, you tell me which one's the most desirable. And if that doesn't decrease the value of your property, I don't know what does. I speak against special use permit. I know that it have restrictions on it, but I think any issuing of a special use permit at this time is nothing more than putting a Band-Aid on an open wound. I do not think it's necessary, and I don't think it's what's recommended for the area. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Appreciate your comment.
Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council Member. My name is Gianni Moscardini. Most of you know me from La Cava Restaurant, the Salty Caper, New Sarum Brewing. So I'm a full downtown person. I believe in this downtown that we have. I want to be successful, so I'm pro-business. Now, I also am a resident of 210 East Fisher Street, which is one of the apartments at the firehouse. My wife and I decided to move there. It's only 3 months there. So I'm going to speak here in 3 hats. First hat is the resident of the firehouse. Second hat is one of the owner of the Salty Caper. And the third hat is 9 years that I'm on the board of the Firehouse Association, and specifically I'm the treasurer. Now, as a resident, I tell you, I'll only be there 3 months. We moved there in December, and the only concern that I have is that I was walking upstairs with my 2 grandsons. One is 3 years old, and one is 4 years old. And it was an early, I would say, early afternoon. And the only thing is I hear is foul language coming up from the brew pit. It was a nice warm day. And I'm not Pudic, but I really did not appreciate that one. As far as the Salty Caper, I have to tell you that as soon as the firehouse pit opened, one of my managers came over to me and said, we're going to have some problem here. We're going to have to hire security. And we had a meeting with all the owners and the manager, and we decided, for security reason, we decided to reduce the hours of the Salty Caper. Instead to be open until 2 o'clock in the morning, the weekend, we reduce it to 12 o'clock at midnight, and during the week, we decide to reduce it to 10 o'clock. That's one of the things that we have done. Also, because I'm also my bookkeeper, I cannot pinpoint exactly what it is, but it looks like, and the manager is telling me that one, and we see it, there is a little bit of a lack of business. We're missing a little bit of the family there. And I can't pinpoint exactly what it is, but there is a problem. There is a problem that we are now attracting the family at the 5 to 7 o'clock range. There is a problem. Now, as treasurer of the firehouse urban loft, I can tell you one day, that I can reiterate the concern that all the residents and some of the business have right there, And for safety reason and for security reason, these people, including me, decide to spend in excess of $10,000 to secure the courtyard. That's how scared they were. So that's what we ended up doing. We ended up going through asking for permit to put a new fence, put in security gate so we can secure the courtyard. And still, we cannot secure the parking lot completely. We can put a barrier in the front, but unfortunately, we can't put anything on the back because the firehouse has the 6 parking spaces right there adjacent to their property. So we cannot close it in. So that's what I'm trying to tell you right here. One thing for sure, 9 years that we are in Salty Caper, see, we never had anybody urinating outside. That one I can guarantee you, okay? And we are checking what everybody drinks. And you know, there is the people that drinks a little bit too much, and there's the people that we escort away, or the people we call taxi cab. It's our responsibility, and we take it seriously. Do you have any question for me?
No, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You, Johnny.
Thank you, Johnny.
Our president is unable to be here this evening. He is changing careers. Okay. We have 100% of our nearby residents, but one of them is not a full because there's a building adjacent, so that's why we had a little bit of confusion here. Our president is redefining his life and could not be here tonight because he's learning to be a nurse. And today is clinical, and he's going to be a great nurse, and I don't want him to miss clinical, and he can't miss it. But his affidavit is, and I'll read it as it's being handed out. North Carolina, County of Rowan, Nicholas Alfieri, appearing before the undersigned, notary, and being duly sworn, says that while walking out of the condominium on the morning of July 20th, 2015, I witnessed a man lying on the ground, passed out in the courtyard of the firehouse brew pit. On the evening of December 27th, 2015, I walked out to the Firehouse Urban Lofts parking lot and witnessed a man walking from the Firehouse brew pit lawn to the parking lot, who proceeded to walk between 2 cars and urinate. Number 3, at this time, I do not recommend permanent status, and it is signed Nicholas Alfieri, sworn to or affirmed and subscribed to me before this 25th day of January 2016, with the official seal and signature of Linda L. Mullis, a notary public. Having given the evidence that we've brought and the testimony, we are in opposition of approval of the request that the Firehouse Brew Pit get permanent status as a bar tavern. In the course of the various processes, it has sounded to us like it's a very difficult thing to undo when people have to come back before City Council and have it undone. And we also are extremely sympathetic to the fact that he is trying to make a business. And so what we would like to see instead, even though we oppose it, is we would, as permanent, because we are also, I've heard no, of all the iterations that have been presented, if he were to get a permanent SUP as a private bar and to sell it, it would then travel with the land. And someone else could take it over who has even more problems than we've seen in 8 months. So that is a real concern to us. We feel that based on the 8 months and the transition that they've made from having a back alley to a side yard, that it is premature to even consider them giving a permanent basis. Their learning curve is not finished. We also question, in their application it says that there are already 2 other private clubs in the area. One is Nashville Nights, and the other one is their former location. So that still has a private club status as far as we understand it, a permanent SUP. And we would suggest to you that within a 3-block radius to have 3 SUPs for private clubs is setting a not very good precedent, where each block in a triangle we will have 3 if this is approved. There is also no accountability if he becomes a permanent SUP as a private club or a bar tavern. And so what we would suggest is that there actually be a status that they are permitted to be a temporary SUP until they get the restaurant up and running. And then that does not saddle downtown Salisbury or community or the adjacent property or the new housing to come with a permanent status exactly the way that it is now. But it allows him to stay open and continue. But we would also suggest that the temporary being continued should have conditions with it. And we have some suggested conditions. At the hearing that we had with the planning board, they requested copies, so they made them. We brought some this time. I can either read them or you can have copies as well. So and these are the ones that we came up with, trying to look at the problems and what might actually help. The first one is to control access in and out of the firehouse brew pit, because it does have multiple entry points. And as Ms. Crowley said, there's a lot of people going in and out all the doors until very recently. And the city has imposed closing the door at 10 o'clock, and they've elected to close it for 24 hours a day. But with the weather, ice, snow, cold temperatures, we've actually had no way to truly test how any of that is. So there's, again, with a closed door in the winter, it's just not a learning curve happening. So the multiple entry points really do need to be addressed. They need to comply with the 11 p.m. noise ordinance. And so to continue the city requirement to lock the side door at 10 p.m. and decorative lighting, if any, is also to be turned off when the side door is locked. Exit only from the front and require orderly and quiet patron leaving, especially after 11 o'clock and at the close of business. Hire off-duty police from 11 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. until this becomes the norm. Minimum of 6 months to run with the temporary permit dates. The control over the side yard and patron behavior. Add a rear fence with gate access at the firehouse brew pit, so there'd be life safety out, but people couldn't just come in, and some sort of an alert system so that people inside would know if a gate is propped open. It must be HPC approved and installed within 7 weeks, based on 4 weeks lead time for the materials. And we've learned that in putting up our fence, which is still underway. Add security cameras so the manager and managing staff inside the building can monitor the outside premises and behavior at all times. Install within 4 weeks to have in place for warm weather seasons, which will be here sooner than we think. Add security exterior lighting, shielding from adjacent 2nd and 3rd floor residential units. For the protection of minor children, there is not a school within 500 feet, but there is a children's theater. And there are children going to performances at the Norville Theater, including during the week. And it's wonderful to see these school buses drive up, and there are these little heads that are looking out, and they're going to performances. But they're also seeing exactly what's been described to you, visible from the street. And so our suggestion is that even though it's not a school, the spirit of it is to prevent children and what they're being exposed to. So what we suggest is that during rehearsal times, play times, school attendance, on weekends of performances, busloads of children and stuff coming that actually the Firehouse Brew Pit provide off-duty police outside during performance and rehearsal schedules at the Norville Theater. And for example, when the police are on site directing bus traffic, which they are, they could have someone who would be an off-duty policeman making sure that everybody is well behaved at the Firehouse Brew Pit. Monitor and stop foul, threatening, and argumentative language outside, and close the side picnic table area until 5 or 6 p.m. They need to operate clearly as a private club, and they pull the Salisbury City temporary permit should be pulled if they're not in ALE compliance, in addition to whatever criteria you have set. And then whatever previous conditions that City Council has found helpful when you've had problems with private clubs in the past. So that's our suggestion. It would have been much easier to have stayed home. It would have been much easier to have not done any of this research, or for our board meetings to not have, our board to not have met as many times as we have to figure out where we belong to help improve the situation. It would have been much easier. But we consciously, as a board, and our membership made the decision that we were not going to be a board that if there was a stabbing or a shooting or some other tragedy, that we never spoke up and no one ever knew what was happening next door. So in that spirit we come. We want to see Firehouse Brew Pits succeed. We want them to, we're named after the firehouse. We are the Firehouse Urban Lofts. That's a history we've adopted. We want to see them to succeed. We want them to make lots of money so they can go ahead and repair and make that wonderful historic building as gorgeous as it needs to be, but not at the price of downtown Salisbury and its perception and its impression. And so the last thing I would leave you with is this. One of our members who was a practicing psychologist could not be here. And she said, in my profession, I frequently work with people whose trajectory requires them to change course before it's too late. One of the questions we ask is, 5 years from now, when you tell the story, what do you want to say was the last straw that finally made you address the problem? Your family bailing you out of jail? A call home that you're in the hospital? So here's the question for the Salisbury City Council. When you look back on decision-making for this developing problem, what do you want to say was the straw that became the last straw and made you act? We have already accumulated evidence of public sex outside, trespassing, unconscious patrons, neighbor harassment, public urination, vomiting on other people's business and private property. If you don't want that to be the impetus for a decision to curb the excess, then what would you have it be? What is it going to change the course of these developments? And the absent member is Susan Hurt, PhD, JD. This quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes: "The great thing in this world is not so much where we are, but in what direction we are moving." Areas that become known and perceived as unsafe or unsavory do not contribute to community well-being and growth. Certainly not being on a major street of the entertainment district and a prime location right over a bridge that introduces all to historic downtown Salisbury. In what direction is the Salisbury City Council moving? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a mess at home too, if that helps.
That's okay.
Good evening. My name is Rose Meeks Jones, and I live at 211 East Fisher Street. If you look up there on the sign, on the picture, from the back parking lot, I'm straight across the street with the little white balcony. I've lived there for 7 years, and I'm also a former downtown business owner, so I'm very vested in our downtown. And this is awkward for me because I happen to be friends with Todd and Jennifer, and I want to see every business in our downtown be successful. But over the last months, as a very close resident, I've had on numerous occasions called the police late at night. One particular incident was at 2 o'clock in the morning. A group spilled out of benchwarmers into the, not benchwarmers, Firehouse Brew Pit, into this back parking lot straight across from my house. And a fist fight was happening amongst 8 or 9 guys. I called the police and they came. Several times I've driven by and watched people throw up on the sidewalk. One evening after a show at Lee Street Theater, I came to Salty Caper to have some pizza with friends. And while my friend was in the restroom inside, I'm sitting on the courtyard, and a guy comes out of the brew pit and starts peeing up against the wall behind me. And those types of things, as a former alcohol business owner, you are responsible for what happens in your establishment and on your premises. As part of your ALE permits, if you have outdoor seating where alcohol is allowed or out in front of your business, that's considered your premises. And I think, well, I know that all of these issues that we've heard about this evening are a lack of on-site supervision. And all of the things outside, it sounds as if there's no supervision. And as far as the addressing the private club status, I have been in the Firehouse Brew Pit probably 6 or 7 times since they opened. Never once have I had to sign anything. I've never ever been sold a membership. I've never seen anybody asked for their membership card. And I have never once, not once, ever seen them cut anyone off. And on every single occasion I've been there, I've watched people that can barely stand up be served drink after drink after drink. And all that is contrary to ABC law. And it's a lack of supervision and a lack of caring on the part of the staff. And I hate to say that because I'm in a bad position here, but I am a resident, one of the few that lives here that's not part of this site there. And I love my downtown. I love walking around, but I won't even walk to Salty Caper for dinner anymore. I just don't feel safe. And it's less than 2 blocks for me. So I just, there are issues and they need to be addressed. And I want to see this business be successful, and I want to see our downtown be successful, but it has to be safe and secure, and it has to be usable for all of our citizens, not just a few. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay. I guess we're at the point where we're going to begin the findings of fact.
One thing, keep in mind is that if, and I had mentioned this to you before, is that if you feel like you have not received enough information on one particular item or another, and you know, and don't feel like you can make a decision tonight, I'm certainly not encouraging that. What I'm trying to do is give you an option, but just remind you that if you do take that route, do not close the evidentiary hearing. Once you close the hearing, it's really kind of a no-no in these cases to reopen it. So if you think you're going to defer this at all to the next meeting, keep the evidentiary hearing open so that additional evidence can be received at the next meeting. That's just a reminder.
Okay. David, did you have?
Preston, I hate the idea of closing down a business that could become a good restaurant. I think I really admire what the solutions offered by the neighborhood. I mean, what are the options that we're allowed to have? I mean, if we deny the SUP, what are the options other than closing them down on March the 1st? Is that a fair question?
It is a fair question. He would need to move forward with the request to become a restaurant. If you deny the SUP, he would need to move forward with the restaurant request, or staff would need to extend the TUP.
Are we
Temporary use-
allowed as council to request that you consider that? But what are we allowed to do?
Well, that would really be out of
Is that beyond our authority?
right. No, sir, that wouldn't be appropriate. Now, I mean, I think it would be appropriate for myself to reach out to my director, who could reach out to other folks on the management team to see if there's evidence that would support extending the TUP. Part of the reason why staff certainly doesn't want to do anything that's going to put this individual out of business. We don't want to do that at all. We issued the temporary use permit as an interim measure. We were trying to be helpful and trying to help this individual get underway and get the rest of his projects going and done. And then when we became aware of the number of police reports and police incidents, and myself and Todd and Captain Thompson, the three of us had a meeting, and we talked about the police reports, and it was of concern to staff that we didn't feel it was right for that responsibility, for that weight to be on staff as a temporary use permit. That's why we encouraged him to move forward with getting this special use permit, that this really needs to be issued by City Council and guided by City Council. I'm happy to sit down with my director and through consultation with other members of the management team, see if there's evidence that would support extending it. It is true that there was a delay from the issuance from January, which was the issuance, until the move-in date. So that is true. So we could certainly take into account that. But again, our goal is to get out from underneath this temporary use permit and for this to be either a restaurant as properly permitted or a special use permit issued by City Council.
Let me ask you to clarify that. Do I hear you say that because there were two subsequent 6-month special temporary use permits, since they didn't occupy the premises until May, there could be a way of interpreting that they've got until May for the second 6 months? Is that a way that you're trying to give us an option?
Effectively, yes,
Okay.
sir.
I want to make sure. I thought that's what I heard, but I want to clarify. That is one particular way we could not issue a new temporary use permit, but could give the individual time to address the other things that need to be addressed.
Right.
Go ahead.
I need to jump in, David. If you had more, I have questions, but I didn't want to take your spot.
The only thing I would encourage, and I had a similar conversation to this with the planning board. Please do not tie your. Yes, it is evidence that a temporary use permit has been issued. However, again, the burden is on the applicant to submit evidence to show that he meets all of the standards required for a permit to be issued for that use. And then the burden is on any opponents to produce evidence to the contrary, that the standards are not being met. It is a fact that a TUP has been issued, but the request to receive a special use permit should not be hinged upon an extension of the TUP.
Point well made. Let me question about the TUP though, just from a findings of fact standpoint. Is there a date, start date, and end date listed on the TUP, or is it 6 months?
They begin 6 months and then it was extended.
Right, but does the TUP say as of this date until this date you have privileges, or does it say 6 months?
I can double check.
And that, to me, goes to your point of is there any interpretation into the way it's been granted?
Right. Hang on one second. I was about to pull it up here, but I may
have that.
Have it in David's packet too.
Seem to.
Maybe we can come back to that one. I want to ask another.
I'm going to find it, though.
Okay. Another question, in fact. Are there not rules in the city ordinances about patrons being in front of an establishment? I mean, I realize we have sidewalk dining options available now that we didn't used to. We made that available a couple years ago, but I don't recall a situation where we ever said that folks can congregate on the sidewalk with open beverages. And maybe they aren't, I don't know, but what are the rules associated with that, just so I understand them?
I would need to defer to the police department regarding that type of question, unfortunately, Councilman.
Okay. Okay, no beverages, but they're still outside. Okay, gotcha. I'm gonna say a couple things and then I'm gonna yield the floor. You haven't helped yourself here. With a temporary use permit, knowing that at some point in time it needed to be permanent, it would seem to me that the best course of action would have been to make sure things happened the way they should have happened. We're in an impossible situation. If we grant the special use permit, we're basically saying it's okay if folks fornicate outside your premises. Where it's okay for folks to do public vomiting and public urination. I mean, we're not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and cut the suspense.
Oh, I know.
It ain't going to happen.
I'm quite aware.
I think you're to be commended also for the fact that you're willing to. Nobody wants a business to suffer as a result of this. But here's the thing. You can't control people, but you can. You have a business to run. You are responsible for what happens as a result of the way you run your business, to the point Mr. Moscardini made about nobody's ever come out of the Salty Caper and urinated on the sidewalk. Similar restaurant, there's similar type establishments in terms of they both serve alcohol, maybe not the same intensity, but they still both serve alcohol. You haven't helped yourself much is what I'm getting at. You can potentially, if the council here says this was some sort of a nice peace offering and we want to try and give you the opportunity of staying open while you can fix the restaurant issues, but you have to control this. There is no, you know, well, it won't happen again. You have to control it.
I agree. And
hang on a sec. This isn't the time to respond. I'm not sure how this is going to play out, but there's no place in our downtown for the kind of things I heard today. In fact, let's go ahead and make sure we put some sort of PG-R 13 whatever on the front part of our council video that shows on the TV. Never in 6 years have I been in a meeting where I had this kind of conversation. And we've talked about special use permits before, and we've talked about private clubs and other things too. Never have I had this kind of conversation. Someone who's watching the broadcast sent me a text a minute ago and says, I guess we just lost our PG rating. There's no place for this in our downtown. There's no place for this anywhere in our city. And you own that, what's happened. The other finding of fact I would make is the next time I have to go to court, I want Judy Candle sitting with me at the table. Been a part of a quasi-judicial hearing where a case for against was so well prepared and documented and presented. So for what it's worth, those are my 2 cents, 3 cents, 4 cents, whatever it is. I'm done.
I'm ready, Mayor, if I may.
Yes, Maggie.
Kenny, were you ready?
No, you go ahead. I'll wait.
I'm aware that people say if you move downtown, you need to be ready to live in a noisy environment. I'm aware that people say that. And I think the young lady, Kimberly, I'm sorry, I don't remember your last name, was very eloquent and very clear in her testimony. She has been exposed to noise and other things from other businesses, but they are well-managed businesses, and that was the distinction. It wasn't that she's not willing to have noise and activity near her home. Someone else in the group talked about several clubs in proximity to each other in the downtown area. That's not an issue for me. I think a thriving downtown is going to have a healthy serving of all kinds of businesses, all close together, all jammed up. That's fine with me, so that's not an issue for me. However, I do have significant concerns regarding the management of this business. I'm not going to repeat what Mr. Miller said. He said it well. This is a difficult decision because we never want to terminate a thriving business. Mr. Littleton stated that he has 17 employees, and we need every job we can get in the city. I do have specific concerns that Mr. Ostel said. Under testimony, they have a, quote, great relationship with ALE and, quote, no problems. But then we had testimony and written proof that their license was pulled by ALE for non-conforming to the rules. So I don't think we have any consequences for mistruths under testimony, but I will recognize that that happened. Finally, I would add that I'm offended by Mr. Littleton's remark that customers can easily decide to, quote, hit the wall. Mr. Littleton, in my world, people not only don't do that, that's the first time I've ever heard that remark, even to verbally say that. So as Mr. Miller said, this is not the decorum that we expect either in council chambers or outside. And it's not the quality of life that we strive to provide for our citizens. So I'm open to conditions among our other council members, but I'm not inclined at this time to approve permanent SUP for this business.
And
Mr. Harden.
thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Mr. Miller. I won't belabor my point because I think you both covered essentially what I wanted to say. This is not a difficult decision for me at all. I'm disappointed and have the same concerns as my colleagues have. What was disconcerting for me, I thought back, I've lived here my entire life, and I remember what Lee Street and Fisher Street and that area looked like back in the 70s. I used to go get my hair cut on the corner of Lee and Fulton, or Lee and Council Streets. I can remember the urine smells. I can remember the disintegrating buildings. I can remember a lot of things that brought back those negative memories. I can remember my parents not wanting me to walk in that area. So I can relate to children having to endure and see those types of things. So that was a little disconcerting. The things that I jotted down, similarly to what Madam Mayor Pro Tem said, I was a little disappointed with the lack of forthrightness and honesty about what the real issues were. I specifically asked about if there had been incidences of, with police and different things, and I felt like you minimized the severity and the seriousness of those until we got these handouts. So I was a little concerned about that lack of honesty with that. You can take the attitude that you can't control what people do once they leave an establishment, but you can control what you do to help lead to what they do. And I don't feel like there seemed to be a lot of accountability or control on patrons or the membership when they were inside of the establishment. The other thing was the livability and desirability. I moved my family from one part of our city to another part of our city because of livability and desirability. So that hits home with me. Nobody should have to pay or be forced to live in a situation that can be harmful or that is not desirable. I did not feel, listening to both sides, and as Mr. Miller said, you didn't do yourself a great service, but I don't really see you being a good community business partner. So with that, I have no problem saying I will not support this at all.
David?
I believe, I agree with everything everyone said here pretty much, which some people accuse me of being rare saying that, but I believe that the evidence supports the first two requirements. There was no evidence regarding whether or not it met the specs of the ordinance. There was no evidence saying that it didn't. meet the visual and functionality of the surrounding area. So we're all on number 3. As a matter of course, I think it might be good for us to consider at some point in time, this is a footnote, to separate health, safety, and welfare from value, because sometimes I've been in planning board situations, as probably all of you have, where you meet one but you don't meet the other and you sort of forget the other. There was no evidence at all of value. I think what we've been hearing is an emotional aspect relative to the health safety and welfare issues. And it's very problematic. There's a blog that's going to take this and tear us up, as we all know, which is unfortunate.
Big deal.
And people can read about it, and you know, somebody not from here is going to read about this and say, I don't want to come to Salisbury, as somebody said, and that's bad stuff. I mean, it really hurts us when we have these kind of conversations in public. But what I'm troubled with is 2 things. One is, I just don't like SUPs. I just don't like things that go with the land forever. And I think as a council, we have to be really, really, really super careful whenever we go there. And second is there's just no evidence whatsoever on value. So legally, since this is a quasi-judicial process, I don't see how we can conceivably grant the SUP. I guess what bothers me the most, though, is that they went to planning board. And planning board unanimously approved that they had met the burden of proof on requirements A and B, but said, we don't think you've met the burden of proof on number C, the health, safety, welfare, and the value issues. And so they tabled it and said, please go back and address these issues and come back to us. And so there's been one continuance, for lack of I mean, it's a legal term, but there's been one delay at the planning board level to address precisely those issues. And I don't feel that ball's pushed forward, because I don't think we felt that there was an issue to resolve the neighborhood's concerns, because I thought the neighborhood was incredible. I thought you guys were amazing. You have all this evidence, and it's basically trashing them. And then you say, here, you know, we have all these conditions. We'd like to keep the business open, and this is what we're willing to give back. I mean, that is amazing.
Very gracious.
You know, I mean, incredibly gracious and fair, you know, beyond imagination. So I don't think they've met the legal burden to be technical about it. I wish they had addressed the 3rd issue, which the planning board asked them to do.
You know, in my mind, the whether the value is consistent, harmed, or improved is irrelevant, because the public health, safety, and welfare has been demonstrated as to be detrimental. I think your point's well made, and it could be a 4th item instead of included in the 3rd.
I'm just saying it's procedurally. I think we ought to think about that, because we've had situations where you met all 3 of those, and then there was no evidence of value. And
I don't know, are we bound by these, or is that something that we can separate number 3 into 2 separate parts?
Not at this time. We would need to do, and I've made note that that's possible future text amendment.
We can work on that. I sense myself that there's not a willingness on the council to go with the SUP. I also sense on the part of staff that there's not a willingness to extend the temporary use permit. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but there was. Let me talk with some other folks before we say for sure we can do it that way. I also sensed a possible solution in the way we interpret the 2 6-month temporary use permits that have already been issued.
Well, I can answer that, because I have located the permit. I can answer that last part, but I'll let you finish.
Well, my point was simply is, if that is possible, since we're not changing an existing permit, I'm not sure what action we need to. You know, we can decline the special use permit request, but if we're going to interpret that a temporary use permit's already in force for another 2 or 3 months, does it make sense for us to add conditions on it at this time? You may tell me that's not possible, to consider it still valid till May. What was the answer to the question?
Well, let me.
You understand what I'm getting at?
I understand what you're getting at. Let me kind of go in reverse and address your most recent comment. Yes, it would be inappropriate for council to recommend or try to add conditions to an administratively issued temporary use permit. That's where I would need to confer with my colleagues at the admin level. Regarding the temporary use permit, any zoning permit that is issued by the city is good for 6 months.
There you go.
Unless it's stated otherwise. If it's expressly stated otherwise within the comments, it can go for that particular period of time. But the standard is that it is good for 6 months.
From the date of issue.
We have the ability through the land development ordinance to extend that. And so we have extended that once. So it's basically lasted for 1 year now. However, the way that the actual language was drafted by the staff member that wrote this does give us some latitude. State's zoning permit allows for upfit and rehabilitation for temporary use as barred during reconstruction of permanent business location. So that's still ongoing. So there is some latitude here, but I want to stop there, and I want that conversation to occur at an administrative level. What I would ask City Council to do is to consider the special use permit request that's in front of you and whether or not you have received adequate evidence that the standards have been met.
I hear you. I hear you.
Okay.
So, Madam Mayor, unless there's other conversation, I'd like to make a motion for denial.
Okay.
Is there any other conversation that needs to go before I do that?
Go for it.
Motion to deny a special use permit to permit a bar tavern at 113 South Lee Street based on all general standards of the Salisbury Land Development Ordinance not being met.
Second.
Okay,
I believe we have to have findings of fact.
Right.
which is
I'm
on
sorry.
that.
I apologize.
I mean,
You would need
we-
to
Each finding of fact.
address each standard first.
they're in your packet.
Okay, so here I volunteered to do the reading again.
Are we going to withdraw that motion?
Well, withdraw that motion. and
Withdraw
do
that
your-
motion. I would like to find the following findings of fact. I move that council find the following. Number one, the use meets all required principles and specifications of the ordinance and any adopted plans and is in harmony with the general purpose and intent and preserves its spirits as evidenced by the following testimony. The site characteristics currently fit within the surrounding area. Two, the proposal as submitted and approved will be visually and functionally compatible to the surrounding area as evidenced by the following testimony. The use will be located within an existing commercial building that is visually and functionally compatible to the surrounding area. Number three, the public health, safety, and welfare will not be assured that the proposed development will substantially injure. I'm not sure we can say will or will not.
What would be best, Councilman, is if you, after the first one, stop.
Okay.
And vote, and then go to number 2 and do a vote, and then go to number 3 and do a vote. So if you could
Okay, so
stop
I read
after
number one.
one.
I move that the council find the following. Number one.
I
Okay,
second that.
second by David. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries.
I've also just read number 2.
Okay, we need a
Second.
second. David has done a second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries.
Number 3, can we break that into 2 pieces?
You can, it just
Say-
needs to be in the same,
Understand?
yeah, it needs to be in the
I
same
mean,
motion.
one is it doesn't meet, the other is there's no evidence.
Okay, so the public,
fine.
number 3, the public health, safety, and welfare will not be assured, and the proposed development and sufficient evidence does not exist to say whether the proposed development will or will not substantially injure the value of adjoining property and associated uses if located where purposed, as evidenced by the following testimony. No evidence has been submitted by a qualified licensed property appraiser indicating this or other uses with alcohol sales has been injurious to the property values. I'm just reading what additional evidence I would add is testimony from eyewitnesses to the conduct and behavior of patrons of the facility of the establishment are contrary to the public health, safety, and welfare.
Good. Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Could I add, Brian, other friendly amendment, you said eyewitnesses, I would say, and adjacent residents.
I accept the friendly amendment.
Okay, we have that amended. Are we ready for the question? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries.
Number 4, the proposed establishment is not located within 500 feet of any lot containing a school, public or private.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, aye.
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 All those opposed, no. Motion carries.
I have no additional conditions.
Are we allowed to have a motion, basically?
It is proper to now have a motion to recommend denial of the request
Okay. do
due
you
to the
wanna
fact that
continue?
not all standards met.
What about number 5, about the additional conditions? We can't do that.
Correct.
Yeah,
Right,
because-
that's not applicable.
He does.
Yep.
Vote on findings. I move that suggested findings do not support the general requirements as required by the Salisbury Land Development Ordinance.
Have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries.